Okay, excuse me, and we are going to get started. So, welcome everyone. And before we begin our conversation today, I would like to mention a couple of housekeeping items. Live interpretation is available for today's webinar. To activate the translation function, please go to the bottom of your screen, click on the globe, and select your language.
Su pantalla a la izquierda. Hola a todos los que se están uniendo el día de hoy. Vamos a estar teniendo interpretación al español. Pueden accesarla en la parte de abajo una vez la función esté encendida. Tiene que deslizar su pantalla hacia la izquierda hasta que vea 3 puntos. Cuando vea los 3 puntos, pues escoger su canal preferido, ya sea inglés o español, y le da a Done. Muchas gracias.
If you have a question, please enter your question in the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible after our presentation and moderated conversation. So welcome again, everyone, to Fairfield County Talks Housing, a program of the Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunity. I'm Yvonne Klein, founder, and I'll be your moderator today. Fairfield County Talks Housing provides fact-based conversations with the experts and leaders in the fields of housing, affordable housing, and zoning. Today's topic is state programs, local impact. The Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, or CHFA, will share data on affordability and outline programs for housing opportunity in Fairfield County. As a former first selectman, I saw firsthand the vital role CHFA, home to the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, played in the creation, renovation, and preservation of affordable housing. For several years, and some might even say decades, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit was the only funding for housing development in Connecticut, as there was not a reliable or a consistent source of state funding for affordable housing. In 2013, the Department of Housing was formed. I serve as its commissioner, thus creating the unique opportunity to respond to the current housing needs of Connecticut residents, complement CHFA's funding, and to create a reliable and consistent state funding stream. Since 2013, CHFA has been a strong partner with the Department of Housing and continued to play a leading role in responding to current housing needs in Connecticut by creating impactful programs, with the result of more Connecticut residents having a place to call home. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Andrew Bolger, Senior Research and Data Analyst at CHFA, and Terri Nash, Community Engagement Officer at CHFA. So Andrew, I believe I'm going to hand everything over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Yvonne, for the introduction, and thank you to the Center for Housing for having us today. As Yvonne mentioned, my name is Andrew Bolger, Senior Research and Data Analyst with CHFA. With me is Terri Nash, Community Engagement Officer. And what we're going to do today is essentially talk about who CHFA is, some of the data and trends that we're seeing in Fairfield County and statewide for the housing market, and also some more recent programs that we've undertaken as a result of those trends that we're tracking. So first and foremost, just a little bit about who CHFA is and what we do. We were established in 1969 as the state's Housing Finance Agency, or HFA. Each state has at least one HFA to generally deliver on the housing needs of low and moderate income households in their states. Our mission is to alleviate the shortage of affordable housing, both on the rental and the homeownership side, through rental production and supporting homeownership. We're a quasi-public agency and we're self-sustaining, so we're able to issue our own bonds to finance our activities and programs. And then we don't really rely on we're not a state agency, we don't really rely on state appropriations, but we do administer programs on behalf of the Department of Housing. On the homeownership side, our kind of resources come in three buckets. We offer one, below market interest rates to first-time homebuyers. We offer down payment and closing cost assistance, and we also offer homebuyer education, both pre-purchase and after. Our programs are generally restricted to first-time homebuyers and also income-qualified homebuyers, generally to not exceed roughly 120% of the area median income. And just as an example, in Bridgeport, that equates to, depending on the household size and location, about $133,000 up to $171,000. And there's also a home price limit as well of roughly $650,000. And that varies a bit from area to area. And I just wanted to also highlight, I mentioned the below market interest rates that we're able to offer. This is, I think, a really significant resource that we can offer first-time home buyers. And so what you see here is the average 30-year fixed last year in green, our average interest rate in orange, and then the blue bars behind that are the average spread between those two rates. And last year, that spread averaged just under 40 basis points. And so if someone in the market could get a 6.5% interest rate, our rate is roughly 6.1. That might seem small, but over the course of a year, that equates to just under $1,000 in savings, and over the course of the mortgage, just under $30,000 in savings. So it's a significant cost saver that we're able to offer first-time home buyers. On the multifamily side, we pursue the creation, acquisition, and preservation of affordable units. We strive to create new affordable units. We try to acquire and also convert non-affordable units into affordable units. And then we also try to preserve existing affordable units, both preserving the affordability restrictions, but also preserving the physical quality of the unit as well. And we do that through a couple different programs, namely like the low-income housing tax credit, the housing tax credit contribution program, small multifamily loan pool, built for CT, and others. And Terri will get into more detail about those in a little bit. We generally require that a certain number of the units in a development that we're helping finance be reserved for income qualified tenants. And that's generally a maximum of between 50 and 80% of the area median income. And just for example, according to HUD, for Stanford, for a family of four, that's between roughly $86,000 and $113,000 per year. And then just kind of a little bit about who are the folks that we're generally serving. You know, we like to think that we're providing housing for all of Connecticut's residents, and using again that same example for the Stanford area, using statewide income levels. Those are folks like bus drivers, dental assistants, travel agents, firefighters and police officers, and folks like that. So we really try to strive to help create affordable housing options for all of Connecticut's workforce and residents. And so with that kind of overview of who CHFA is, what we're going to do today is dive into some of the trends and housing needs that we're seeing across the state. And a lot of this information comes directly from our 2023 Housing Needs Assessment, or HNA for short. And what the HNA is essentially a data strategy document that is intended to serve as a resource for both us, but also our partners to work with as close to real-time data and trends and make really more informed decisions generally. The document itself is split up into a couple different sections, three of which we're going to get into today, looking at the demographics and housing stock, looking at what's called the housing gap analysis, and then looking at more recent trends coming out of the pandemic around sales and rents as well. Incorporates data from a lot of different sources, mainly from HUD, the census, CoStar, which is basically the back end of apartments.com, Zillow, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, and a couple others. And then you can see there, it's available at that link at the bottom with also on that page is an interactive dashboard that you can basically look at an interactive version of all the cards, the data that you're going to see here today, and that is updated on a monthly basis as well. So first and foremost, we like to kind of start these conversations off with first off talking about the demand for housing we're seeing across the state. The kind of narrative that Connecticut has really told itself over the last couple of years and decades is that we're not growing in population, really. We're either just whether declining population or flat. And so why would we need to build more housing? And you can generally see over the last 5 years that that narrative kind of holds up in some areas, kind of, and not really in others. In the Metro Cog and the Western Cog, we're actually seeing pretty significant population increases. But what is universally true in every area in Connecticut is we're seeing an increase in the number of households being formed. And the census defines a household as anytime someone occupies a new housing unit. So the typical example is a recent high school or college graduate who was living with their parents, gets their first job, and moves into their first apartment. That's a new household that just got formed, right? And so across the board, we're seeing generally smaller household sizes, but what that translates to is an increased need for more housing, right? And so while population in Connecticut's only increased about a 0.5 percentage point over the last 5 years, we've seen a 3.5 percentage point increase in the number of households. And normally that's what we want to see, right? It's an economic driver, but when we're not pairing it with enough new housing production, that's when things can get a bit distorted in the market. And so what you're looking at here is the number of permits issued statewide in Connecticut by building size back to 1966. And what you'll note right away is that a lot of our construction happened, or our permits were issued pre-1990. There were some pretty significant swings during those couple decades, but generally we permitted between 10, 20, upwards of 25,000 units per year at the peak. In the 90s, we kind of leveled off, producing right around 10,000 or permitting right around 10,000 units a year. And then the Great Recession hits us, and we see a significant drop in overall housing production, right? You think the Great Recession was a housing-led recession, and so that really hit home builders particularly pretty hard. And so we saw a really significant drop in permits for 1 unit, your kind of traditional single-family unit, whereas in recent months, or in the last couple of years, we've seen really kind of all-time low permits for that building. Whereas in kind of that reddish color you see there for units in buildings 5 or more units, that's actually been a pretty significant bright spot for the state. In 2024, there were 4,100 permits issued for those units. That's the most we've seen since the late 80s. So that's kind of a bright spot. But overall, we're seeing housing production well below where we were before the Great Recession. So not only is that not kind of meeting the need for the more recent household formation we've been seeing, but what that also leads to is a rapidly aging housing stock. And so Connecticut's median year built for all of its housing stock is 1966. That compared to nationally, the national number is 1979. So a roughly 13-year difference between how old our housing stock is and the nation at large. And if you look in some of our kind of our metro areas, the housing stock in there is much older, north of 75 years or older in some zip codes in, say, Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, and other areas. And that raises a whole lot of concern for the need for remediation, potential exposure to things like lead paint and other health issues as well. But zooming in on your region specifically, just going to give a quick overview of what the housing stock looks generally. I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone, but for that traditional single family, the 1 unit detached, looking at various zip codes in the region, it's generally more predominant in the more suburban communities outside of Stamford, Norwalk, Bridgeport, and Danbury. Looking at 2 to 4 unit structures, that is kind of on the flip side. It's more clustered, again, as you might expect, in the Stamford, Norwalk, Bridgeport, and Danbury areas. And then the same can be said for 5 or more unit structures, again, really clustered in those more urban areas. I don't think that would be surprising, but I just wanted to set the stage for the conversation. So with that as the backdrop, the next piece of the HNA, kind of the crucial piece, is what's called the housing gap analysis. And you may have seen more recent versions of this coming from, say, the OPM Fair Share study. But what this is essentially trying to estimate the number of additional housing units that need to be made available by tenure and income so that no one in that group is cost burdened, i.e. paying more than 30% of their income on housing. The number itself is not a production target, but it does kind of point to where additional housing additional production could be of use. and it uses data from the Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy from HUD, or CHAZ for short. It's basically repackaged American Community Survey data, and it's used by HUD and others to plan, distribute grants, and like we're doing today, demonstrate housing needs. And so the gap formula, as you can see in the bottom there, is the number of households in a given region for a given income, subtracting out the number of affordable units to this group of households, taking into account the number of units occupied by other income households. And so visually what it looks like on a statewide basis, in this case for renters earning between 0 and 30% AMI. On the left here, you have the total number of households earning this income statewide, shaded by whether or not they are cost burdened or not cost burdened. And right off the bat, you can see roughly 75% of these renters are in fact cost burdened given their income constraints. And on the right, you have the total number of units that are available to these renters, or that are affordable and available to these renters. And they are shaded by whether or not they are occupied by someone in this income bracket or occupied by someone at a higher income in light green there. And so the gap number itself is twofold. It's the difference between the height of the two bars, so that kind of dotted box you see there, also including the gap also includes the number of units, again, occupied by higher income households. And so when we look at your region specifically, and we see this resembles statewide trends, you again, on the left-hand side, you have, in fact, more households earning under 30% AMI than there are units affordable at that income level. You have a surplus of units available to or affordable to renters earning 30 to 50 and 50 to 80% AMI. And then on the higher end of the market, you do in fact have more households renter households earning above 80% AMI than there are units affordable to them. And so what basically is playing out here, and again, this resembles statewide numbers, is kind of a squeezing effect in the middle of the market. And so while there is a surplus of units in between affordable to 30 to 80% AMI, because there's a lack of units that are affordable to the lowest income renters, they are essentially forced to rent up into units that are affordable to someone earning 50% AMI. On the flip side on the other side of the market, because there's a lack of units, but also not everyone wants to max out their housing budget, and with higher incomes gives you more options, right? And so someone earning, say, 85% AMI has the option to occupy a unit that's affordable to 50 to 80. And so what is essentially happening is, yes, there are more units available than there are households in the middle of the market, but because of the lack on the kind of poles of the market, what we're seeing is a squeezing effect in the middle. And so just to kind of put some numbers on it, for the lowest income renters in your region, in the West Cog and the Metro Cog, we see a gap of roughly 23,000 units. Again, that is not a production target, but we just kind of put that out there to compare ourselves to other estimates that get put out on a regional basis. What we see is roughly a third of the units priced for renters earning the lowest income are occupied by higher income households. What we also see is those same households occupy about a quarter of the units priced for higher income households. And so that's again going back to the shortage of units leading to these folks being forced to rent up into more expensive units. And then again, on the other side of the market, renters earning above 80% AMI occupy 13% of the units priced for under 30, and then they also occupy a quarter of the units priced for renters earning 30 to 80% AMI. So with that, kind of pivot gears to talk about some more recent trends, especially those coming out of the pandemic. First and foremost, we're going to look at home sales, as you can see here in your region, for 1 to 4 unit home sales. Again, this resembles statewide trends, but going back to 2001, we see kind of a run up to the Great Recession, and then kind of a bottoming out in overall sales volume in kind of 2009 to 2011. And then a kind of gradual improvement in overall sales volume leading up into the pandemic, where in 2021, statewide, we saw roughly 61,000 home sales for, again, 1 to 4 units. And that's the most we've seen since 2005. In your region specifically, we saw above 16,000 home sales. Again, that's a record over the last couple decades. But you see in more recent years, we've seen a real drop in overall sales volume activity. That's in part because of what the Fed has done to counter inflation, and I'll get to that in a second. But what you should take away from this is kind of a divergence between overall sales volume and the median sale price, right? We've seen a drop in overall home sales, but not a drop really in the median home sale price. And so again, I mentioned what the Fed has done to counter inflation in recent years. Right now, mortgage rates are hovering around 6.5% to 7%. It's pretty volatile right now. But what you'll notice is that that level is not historically abnormal, right? In the early 80s, we had interest rates at their peak roughly 18%. It's come down significantly since that time. But what really was, or should stand out to you, is just how low interest rates got in, say, 2020 to 2023, right? We were right around 3% during that time. And as inflation started to take hold, the Fed began to increase interest rates rapidly. And between October 2021 and 2022, we saw the largest year-over-year increase in mortgage rates we've seen since 1981. As you can see in the kind of the green bars towards the right side of this chart. And so what we had during 2020 and 2020 to 2022 was a significant amount of home sales, right? So folks locking in at reasonable prices with low mortgage rates. But what we also had was a bit of a refi boom, right? A lot of folks took advantage of those low rates to refinance their say 5% mortgage to a 3%. And so right now in Connecticut, we have roughly a third of homeowners who don't even have a mortgage at all, right? All they owe is on their taxes and insurance. And then as you can see here this is data from FHFA, you can see in that kind of darker orange color and the lighter blue color, another third of homeowners have interest rates below 4%. So there's only about a third of all homeowners who have rates 5% and above. And so what that does is create a bit of an interest rate and price lock phenomena, right? Where someone who say bought their home in 2021 at a 3% rate, it's now holding their home and has seen interest rates go to 7%, and also prices escalate significantly during that time. And they're saying to themselves, it's not really an attractive market to list my home currently. And so what we've seen as a result is the number of active listings. Here, this is for your region, but again, this resembles statewide trends. We've seen the number of active listings in Connecticut drop dramatically. And so in your region, we had depending on the month you're looking at, 4,000 to 6,000 homes for sale at any given time, depending on the seasonality. As COVID took hold, that number dropped significantly. And as of March last month, in your region, there was just over 1,000 homes for sale. So roughly an 80% deficit from where we were at this time in 2019. You see a lot of red year-over-year decreases there, but we do see some positive numbers of late in those kind of blue bars. And so the situation is getting a little bit better, but as you can see, we're still well below where we were pre-pandemic. And Connecticut kind of stands out in this stat. And so statewide, we actually have the largest deficit of homes for sale for that kind of March 2019 to 2025 period. And you can see some kind of regional differences here. But again, in the West Cog, you see an 80% deficit. You see a 79% deficit in the Metro Cog, similar to, say, the Northwest Hills and the Capital Region as well. But more so what we're seeing is a bit of a national regional divide playing out, where in the Northeast, kind of Mid-Atlantic into the Midwest, we're seeing, again, significant for sale active listings deficits. Where in the South, we're actually seeing areas that are well above where they were at this time in 2019. I've seen a couple different reasons for why this might be the case, but what's most, I think, convincing to me is including that kind of interest rate and price lock phenomena happening, is we've seen a kind of stop in migration from the Northeast to Southern markets, particularly among retirees, right? For someone who's living in Connecticut, who say bought their house in the 90s, doesn't have a mortgage anymore, it's just not super attractive to go buy something in Florida right now, where prices have escalated. Interest rates are double where they were a couple years ago, and you throw into the mix that there's significant insurance problems in Florida right now, with premiums increasing pretty significantly. So what's happening in particularly the Northeast and Midwest is older homeowners just generally holding on to their home for longer and not going and listing their home on the market, thereby decreasing the number of active listings that are available. But in Connecticut specifically, what this deficit does is lead to pretty notable market distortions relative to where we were in 2018, 2019. For example, here we have the percent of homes sold above their list price by month. And what you'll note right away is, again, 2018, 2019, in Connecticut, generally between 15 to 20% of homes would sell above what they were listed for. And then we get into a bit of a supply and demand imbalance, where as the number of active listings go down, demand remains strong. We start to see bidding wars play out. And in mid-2022, we saw most Connecticut markets peak in this number at roughly 75%, indicating 3 out of 4 homes sold above what they were listed for. We've seen some moderation in recent months for the Bridgeport and Connecticut, or Bridgeport MSA and Connecticut generally. We're just above 40% now, but you can see the US has come back down almost to where it was pre-pandemic, to just above 20% of homes selling above their list price. So again, kind of a divergence between where the inventory situation is for Connecticut and that number nationally. The other thing that is playing out is just homes are selling much faster in Connecticut than they once did. So this is the mean number of days until pending, basically how long it takes on average for an offer to be accepted. And in the Bridgeport MSA, we saw this number between 50 to 100 days in 2018, 2019. And now it's well below 50. And you can again see that kind of divergence in recent years between the US and the Connecticut markets. But in Bridgeport MSA specifically, that number in March was just 38 days. So just over a month compared to 2 to 3 months pre-pandemic. All of that combined, it's led to a pretty significant deterioration in the affordability situation for home buyers, specifically first-time home buyers, right? As prices and interest rates remain elevated, we've seen the annual income required to afford the typical home, assuming 20% down and spending no more than 30% of your income on your mortgage. That number has gone from roughly $100,000 in the Bridgeport MSA to north of $180,000 between 2020 and now. That similar dynamic has played out throughout the state and nationally, but a significant number of folks are being just basically priced out of the market, and we're seeing that play out in the rental market as well. So as the for sale market remains hotter than it was a couple of years ago, we're seeing vacancy decrease as well statewide. Whereas in Connecticut and Orange there, you see rental vacancy rates right around 5%. And then the pandemic hits and rental vacancy rates drop significantly. Statewide right now, the vacancy rate is roughly 3.5%. It's roughly 5% in the Stanford, well, what is essentially the Fairfield County market. It's a little bit of a cooler market than statewide, but again, still well below the national number. And so similar to that limited supply in the for sale market, what that does is then lead to notable rent growth in both the Fairfield County area and statewide. And so in mid-2022, we saw year-over-year rent growth peak at 6.5%. For Connecticut, for the national estimate that was approaching 10%. Both have come down in recent months or recent years, but Connecticut's still a little bit elevated at roughly 3.5% year over year. Still, it's cooler than it was, but you got to think that these are rent growth numbers, right? These aren't actual rents. And so what this has resulted in is rents generally being 20 to 30% more expensive than they were in 2018, 2019. And so again, for the Fairfield County market generally, you see that kind of purple at the top of the market, at the top of the graph there. average asking rents between 2018 and now have gone from roughly $2,200 to $2,700. And a similar dynamic is played out across the state as well. So with that, I think it's pretty clear there's significant demand for more housing in general, but also more demand for supporting especially first-time home buyers. And so one of the programs that we've launched recently in partnership with the Department of Housing and the Governor's Office is called Time to Own. What this program essentially does is offer a 0% interest rate loan with no monthly payments to first-time home buyers of up to $25,000. And essentially, 10% of that $25,000 is forgiven on the anniversary of the closing of the loan for 10 years. So if the home buyer stays in the home that they purchased for 10 years, they owe us nothing in return, right? If they stay for 5 years, they would owe us back 50%. And you can see here just some of the numbers we've done in the WestCog and MetroCogs. We've gotten roughly 520 applications. We've assisted to date 480 home buyers with an average assistance amount of just over $22,000 in the last month or so. And you can see the total funds we've distributed using the program, just over $15 million. And, I really think we really think that this program is helping first-time home buyers compete in what is really a extremely competitive home sales market. And you can just see the difference in some statistics for our borrowers that use Time to Own and those that do not. And so Time to Own, generally, those borrowers have a slightly lower income, but they are able to afford a slightly more expensive home for what is essentially the same median monthly payment there is what you can see there. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Terri to talk about some of the rental development programs that we offer at CHFA.
Thank you, Andrew. Lots of good stuff, tons of good data. I appreciate that. I just want to talk a minute about the low-income housing tax credit, or the affordable housing tax credit, which is still the most important funder of affordable housing nationwide. It was a program created by the Internal Revenue Service in 1986 by the Federal Tax Reform Act. And so over the years, it's been hugely successful in addressing the needs of households and families with incomes less than 60% AMI. You'll see on the screen, we have Crescent Crossings Phase 1C, which is a Bridgeport development. It's absolutely beautiful. There are 86 units of new construction here. 63 of those apartments are affordable to folks at the 30%, 50%, and 60% area median income bands. There are 23 unrestricted market rate units available as well. It's important to us to have an integrated housing model whereby it's a neighborhood. Folks of all different income levels are living together in an apartment community. This particular development utilized the competitive 9% LIHTC program, CHFA's taxable bond financing, the Department of Housing's Housing Trust Fund and Flex Funds, DECD, Department of Economic and Community Development funds for cleanup, and others. So you can see it's quite complex putting a deal together. And what we have is really a beautiful result. It looks like any apartment that I think I'd like to get on that waiting list. So LIHTCs are available to every state. I just want to mention that CHFA is the administrator of the program for Connecticut, and we get roughly $10 million. So that $10 million has to be allocated amongst probably $30 million worth of applications. So the 9% program is very competitive, and applications come from municipalities or locations in municipalities statewide. And we do a fair amount in Fairfield County every year. The way that tax credits work, and I just wanted to share this with you too, as we're going to talk about Armstrong Court Phase 2. The the owner or developer of a project will work with a syndicator who gathers together investors who will purchase the tax credits that are available. The tax credits provide equity. So an investor who has a tax burden will buy the tax credits that they can then use on their filings, their tax filings. And in return, they provide equity to a development. That equity infusion is free money and essentially is able to provide lower rents. It supports lower rents to a development because the cost of construction is lower. That's the theory, and it's played out very well. They play a vital role in all of the housing that we're doing. So in addition to the competitive 9%, we have a 4% program. This is a 4% deal in front of us, Armstrong Court Phase 2. It was placed in service a couple of years ago, and there were 4 phases to this development for a total of 150 units. This particular is a substantial rehab of 42 units. I wish I had the before picture to share with you because it's always very dramatic when you see some aging stock that has deteriorated physically and with mechanical systems obsolete, et cetera, to become fully realized again in the product that you see here. Units are affordable to folks at the 50% and 60% AMI band in this particular development. And the sources of funds were the 4% program, CHFA's tax-exempt bond financing, the department's home funds, and others. On the smaller program side, we have the Housing Tax Credit Contribution Program. This is a program that the state runs through the Department of Revenue Services, and it provides a $10 million of tax credits for the state of Connecticut for private businesses who meet eligibility criteria and have a tax burden. And they can then purchase the credits, and in return, they give dollar for dollar investment to the nonprofit developers who use the proceeds to build or rehab affordable housing opportunities throughout the state. This particular development at 269 Hoyt Street in Darien was board approved very recently, just last month, but it will provide 3 units of housing for folks who are earning less than 50% area median income. And it'll be a moderate rehab to bring the 3 units back to livable, affordable, sustainable state. This Housing Tax Credit Contribution Program, by the way, supports our mission of providing residents with quality, affordable housing throughout the state, and it strengthens the relationships that we have with nonprofit developers, enabling them to have access to, again, free capital that helps them to meet their missions and serve their constituents. Another program that CHFA administers is the Small Multifamily CDFI Loan Program. CDFIs are community development financing institutions that are, I think there's 12 statewide, and they are investing in local properties with developers who often don't have the opportunity to access traditional funding through traditional banks. So we support the redevelopment and rehabilitation of small, let's say 2 to 20 units of mixed use or straight residential development. We've invested in the last 10 years over $19 million rehabilitating close to 90 properties and creating about 400 affordable rental units. This low-cost capital makes it feasible for developments to change dramatically. So you'll see here 1736 Stratford Avenue in Bridgeport in its before state, which was completely abandoned, very blighted. Inside pictures were like disastrous, but it's turned into an absolutely lovely building, providing 4 affordable units with 7,500 square feet of retail space on the ground floor. A local nonprofit is leasing some of that retail space. And the price per unit is an astoundingly low amount. So the total amount that we invested was $247,000. The Capital for Change folks would have put in another, say, 50 to 100,000. The owner puts in a little bit of money, but altogether we're creating a lot of units for under $100,000 a unit. This is a great program. It was expanded in January, and we received an infusion of cash from the CHFA's board of directors, $10 million, and also, yes, I'm still on the small multi. Thanks, thanks, Andrew, and also the ability to do single family if we needed to. And now another program that we run through CHFA as administrators for DOH is the Build for CT program. $200 million over fiscal year 24-25 biennium was approved for the development of middle income rental housing. This is an important piece too, because there's a lot of need, as Andrew mentioned, and you saw in his charts. There is a squishing and squeezing of the middle income households. And so the goal here is to offer subordinate financing that would essentially purchase units in a market rate building. This will incentivize developers of market rate multifamily properties to create units that are affordable to middle income households and enable folks to kind of have more opportunity statewide. This particular project in front of you is Steel Point Harbor Apartments in Bridgeport. CHFA provided a $20 million loan to support the construction. It's part of the larger Steel Point Harbor redevelopment property and is an approximately 40-acre site of mixed-use, urban infill, waterfront redevelopment. In total, there will be 420 units with 160 units set aside for households earning between 60% to 120% area median income. The loans can be structured as construction to permanent or permanent only, and they're provided in participation with a primary lender bank. Our rates are in the 1 to 3% range at a fixed rate for longer terms. And it's been hugely successful. The legislature just approved, again, an infusion of cash for this program. Wilton Center Lofts in Wilton is a convenient walk to the Wilton Metro North Rail Station and is the first and only new development in downtown Wilton in the last 30 years. It's beautiful. Through that Build for CT program, CHFA is providing a $1.75 million loan to support its construction. It has 40 units with 20 units set aside for households earning 60% to 120% AMI. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know Andrew is happy to answer any questions as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew and Terri. We have a couple of questions from the audience. And I would just remind folks, if you have a question, to please enter your question under the Q&A function, and we should have a chance to ask and have your question answered in the last few minutes. So question here is about the time to own. And the question is, was the amount for time to own reduced from 40,000 to 25,000? And if it was reduced, what's the chance that it might go back up again?
So it was reduced from actually 50,000 in some cases to a maximum of $25,000. We did that to essentially make sure the funds lasted longer and went to more home buyers. As to it going up again, I have not heard any discussion about that, so I don't know if I can comment on that.
Okay, great. Couple more questions. Where do you see Connecticut's housing market heading in the next 6 months?
I wish I had my crystal ball to say exactly what's going to happen, but it's difficult to say right now. Before the various tariff announcements, I could have told you a story about how rent growth slowing down, leading to the Fed. Rent growth makes up a large portion of the Fed's inflation estimates. So as that number went down, they'd be more and more likely to cut rates, making it more attractive for home buyers to potentially list their home. That would have potentially increased inventory levels, moderated prices, potentially could have seen rental vacancy rates tick back up and rent growth slow down as well. But with, again, the various tariff announcements that have happened, we've seen some pretty volatile numbers in the bond market, and interest rates have actually gone back up a little bit. So it's very uncertain right now. I don't really have a great answer, exactly predictive, unfortunately.
Well, thank you. It's worth the conversation. And while you're here, we might as well ask. We have some other questions from our audience members. What is the application process for Build for CT? And at what stage of development does the project have to be to start that process? So I see you have the link here, Build for CT. But again, just being mindful of the time we have. So when should one apply for Build for CT?
So just very quickly, you'll get tons of information at the Build for CT website, but just to let you know that once you have a development that's already being financed by a primary lender, that's the time to think about Build for CT. There has to be a senior lender in place before CHFA comes in with this program.
Great. Another question from our audience members. I'm on the board for a 100-unit affordable housing complex in Fairfield. 82 units are 30% AMI, and the rest are 80% AMI. A neighbor has come forward to offer us their half-acre property. Where do I start in getting finance to at least buy this property?
That is an exciting opportunity you have. What you might want to think about is if you buy the property, what you're going to do with it. Are you going to add on to your existing property? Are you going to build something separate entirely? Because that will make a difference as to what type of funding you have. Contact me. I'll be happy to walk you through the different programs we have and what your best steps would be.
Great. Is there a way to know how many properties in Stamford have LIHTC funding and how to know when it's due to expire?
Sure. We have a list ourselves, but you can also go onto the HUD website. They keep LIHTC data nationwide. You can look by region, by state and by region, and see what LIHTC developments are there. In terms of when they were built, I'm not sure if that information is available on the HUD website, but we are aware of expiring use restrictions and working to preserve the affordable housing opportunities that exist. So it's quite possible we would have that information. Not promising, but possible.
Another source is the National Housing Preservation Database. It's kind of a third-party nonprofit organization, but they do have a decent list of subsidy expiration dates as well.
Great. So Andrew, earlier in your slide presentation, you talked about folks renting up, renting down, and really outlining the, how I guess the income levels weren't necessarily lining up with the rents and apartments. I think that's the best way I can say that today. But this is more of a comment, you know, when you talk about folks being, you know, being forced to rent up or having the luxury of renting down and then creating the squeeze. I mean, this is sort of an argument for deed restricting apartments, right? Because it
Definitely. Yeah.
restricts
Mhm.
it protects the income or it restricts the income.
Right.
And I think that's something important to note because, you know, clearly you do a lot of that business at CHFA with respect to that. And let's see if we have any more questions. A few more minutes left. So asking you to look into your crystal ball. What are you hearing? You know, what do you think is going to happen with HUD funding under the current administration?
Some HUD funding has been paused but not eliminated. And there are certain programs that are now under review for audit, and then it will be determined whether or not they're going to go forward. For example, the Section 8 authority and whatnot. I don't think there could be huge changes made without legislative approval because some of the programs are by law. But again, it's so hard to say because, you know, it seems like everything's up for review. So we've been told that it's fair to say business as usual until told otherwise, you know.
Yeah, at the very least, it's something we're keeping rapt
Mhm.
attention to.
Yes.
Right. What does CHFA do to help tenants who have to move as a result of expired tax credits?
Well, generally, if there is an expiration coming and residents have to move, the owner needs to inform CHFA that this is going to take place and a relocation plan is generally developed and some assistance from the owner to aid the development's residents in the move is provided. CHFA itself does not have any funding for such programs, although anytime there's resident relocation, there has to be a relocation plan.
Great. You talked a little bit about CDFIs. Are there CDFI programs available here in Fairfield County? By whom? And just a quick review, who would typically apply for funding from a CDFI? Would that be the developer?
Sure. So in Stamford, you have the Housing Development Fund, and HDF is very active. They do a lot of single family opportunities. They also do multifamily in the sense of like 2 or 3 family homes. Who applies to the CDFI is anyone who's interested in, for this particular purpose, anyone who's interested in bringing back online developments that are let's say, I'm saying developments, but they're homes, 2, 3 family homes, sometimes up to 20, that are, you know, obsolete, need to be rehabbed, maybe they're blighted, maybe they just really need significant rehab. So you as the potential purchaser or owner who is interested in bringing these online for a rental opportunity, you would then go to the CDFI, have the conversation. They are able to provide you with technical assistance on the process of applying. Whether, you know, as far as the small multi-pool goes, that is transparent to you. So you would be applying to the CDFI who would then source some of that funding from us. You can mention the program, but you don't have to say, apply for that program. You just apply for funding through them and they look to find the most inexpensive way for you to do your work.
And this might be our last question. Expiring tax credits means that, and this is a question, so expiring tax credits means that units will go to market rent? Question mark.
When the tax credits extended use period expires, which is generally 40 years in Connecticut, then they can revert to market rate. Many times the owner will rehabilitate their project, syndicate the project, use tax credits again, and go out another 40 years. So it doesn't necessarily have to go to market rate, but that is one possibility.
Yeah, I think there's a real concern amongst some folks with respect to the, if you will, the expiration dates. And I think quite often, we saw those really not coming to term, if you will, because there were further extensions. So I think that's good news for Connecticut. I think that's it for our questions from our audience. So I'd like to thank everyone today for joining us. Thank our panelists, our audience, our sponsor, the Housing Collective, and all of our partners, the Partnership for Strong Communities, Fairfield County's Community Foundation, and Local Initiative Support Corporation, as we all work together to deliver safe, equitable housing solutions for families and individuals across Connecticut. So please stay on top of our activities. And if you could just pop our link in the chat so folks could subscribe to our newsletter. And again, Andrew and Terri, thank you so much for your informative presentation today, and look forward to continue to working with you. And have a good day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.